November 25, 1942. Tabourba, Tunisia. 10:30 hours. The dust here tastes different than in Libya. It is finer, sharper. It grinds between your teeth and settles into the creases of your uniform like a second skin. Major Carlo Graziani of the Italian Bersaglieri stands beside a burning M3 Stuart tank, wiping soot from his goggles. The heat radiating from the steel hull is intense, warping the air around it, but Graziani isn't looking at the fire. He's looking at the prisoners. A dozen American Gs sit in the dirt, hands clasped behind their heads. They are chewing gum. To the battle-hardened veterans of the Afrika Korps and the Italian First Army, this is a spectacle. These Americans are tall, well-fed, and inexplicably casual. Their uniforms are clean, suspiciously clean. They don't look like soldiers who have crawled through the hell of the desert. They look like mechanics who took a wrong turn on a Sunday drive. Graziani kicks the tire of a captured Willys Jeep. It is packed with treasures. Cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes, tins of real coffee, chocolate bars that don't taste like sawdust, and magazines featuring smiling girls in swimsuits. "Look at this," a German Hauptmann sneers, picking up a tin of Spam. They bring their pantry to the front line. They fight like they are on vacation. This was the consensus among the Axis command in late 1942. The Americans had landed during Operation Torch with overwhelming numbers and industrial might, but they lacked the one thing that couldn't be manufactured in Detroit, the killer instinct. In the officer messes of Tunis and Bizerti, the jokes were merciless. The Italians, often maligned by their German allies for their obsolete equipment, found a grim satisfaction in mocking the newcomers. They called the Americans the jewelers because of their obsession with technical precision over tactical intuition, or simply the tourists. The sentiment was dangerous. It was intoxicating, and it was based on a fatal misunderstanding of who the enemy actually was. The illusion of weakness. To be fair to the Axis assessment, the Americans were green. Painfully so. In the weeks following the landings, U.S. armored columns operated with a naive aggression that bordered on suicidal. They drove tanks down valley floors without securing the high ground, a rookie mistake that German 88mm anti-tank gunners exploited with ruthless efficiency. They broadcasted their positions on open radio channels. They clustered their vehicles in tight bunches, presenting perfect targets for the Luftwaffe. The Axis commanders, men like General Jürgen von Arnim and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, watched this sloppy behavior and drew a logical conclusion. The Americans were soft. Rommel, the Desert Fox, famously dismissed the quality of American armor, noting that while their engines were good, their tactical doctrine was non-existent. He saw an army that relied on logistics rather than leadership. But the mockery went deeper than tactics. It was cultural. The Italian officers, men who had spent years fighting a seesaw war across the sands of Libya, saw the American reliance on comfort as a weakness. They believed that a soldier who needed hot coffee and fresh socks to fight would break when the supply lines were cut. They mistook the American logistical tale for a lack of spiritual fortitude. December 1942. The long stop hill. The rain begins to fall. The Tunisian winter is setting in, turning the dust into a thick, viscous mud that swallows boots and tank tracks alike. On the front lines, the banter among the Americans is drying up. The cakewalk they were promised has turned into a freezing, muddy stalemate. U.S. units are being piecemealed into battle, battalion by battalion, often under the command of British officers they don't know and don't trust. Confusion reigns. American commanders are miles behind the front, plotting movements on maps that don't match the terrain. Orders take hours to reach the men in the foxholes. When the Germans counterattack, the American response is slow, disjointed, and frantic. From the other side of the ridge, the Axis observers watch the chaos through their binoculars. They see U.S. tanks reversing without infantry support. They see artillery shells landing miles off target. They see an opportunity. Rommel is growing restless. He senses the fragility of the Allied line. He knows that the British 8th Army is closing in from the east, but here, in the west, the Americans are the weak link. They are the soft underbelly. He begins to draw plans for an offensive that will not just defeat the Americans, but humiliate them. He wants to shatter their morale so thoroughly that they will lose the will to fight. He targets a specific location on the map, a gap in the grand dorsal chain of the Atlas Mountains, a place called the Kasserine Pass. The Italians and Germans share a final laugh at the expense of the Yankees. They believe they are about to teach the Americans a lesson in the art of war. They believe the enemy will run at the first sight of a Tiger tank. They are right about the lesson, but they are wrong about who will be doing the learning. The trap is set. The wind is howling through the pass, and 30,000 inexperienced Americans are walking blindly into the mouth of the Wolf. February 14, 1943, Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. 6:30 hours, the morning air is deceptive. A sandstorm is brewing in the east, whipping the desert floor into a blinding ochre haze. To the men of the U.S. 1st Armored Division, stationed around the isolated hills of Jebel Lasouda and Jebel Ksaira, the storm provides a false sense of security. They believe nothing can move through that weather. They are wrong. Out of the swirling dust, they appear, not as shapes, but as a low, trembling vibration in the ground. Then comes the squeal of tracks. The 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions erupt from the haze like steel leviathans. Leading the charge are the Tiger's 60-ton monsters that the American 37mm anti-tank shells simply bounce off of like hail on a tin roof. Panic isn't immediate. Confusion comes first. The American defense is set up poorly. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, commanding the 2nd Corps from a bunker miles away, has ordered his troops to occupy the high ground on the hills, leaving the armored reserves too far back to support them. It is a textbook disaster. The Germans simply bypass the hills, surrounding the isolated American infantry like islands in a shark-infested sea. "They're all over us," a radio operator screams into his handset. "Tanks! Tigers! Everywhere!" The Stukas dive next. The sound of their Jericho trumpets, that terrifying mechanical scream, shatters whatever composure is left. What follows isn't a battle. It is an execution. The Kasserine Run. By February 19th, the German thrust pushes through the Kasserine Pass itself. The American retreat turns into a rout. This is the moment history will remember as the Kasserine Run. It is a humiliating spectacle. Roads are clogged with fleeing trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks. Men throw away their rifles to run faster. Perfectly good artillery pieces are abandoned in ditches. The discipline of the U.S. Army evaporates in the face of the veteran Axis onslaught. To the Italian officers watching the advance, the scene is almost comical. They drive past abandoned field kitchens where pots of stew are still boiling. They find unopened mailbags, piles of winter coats, and crates of Coca-Cola. It is a supply dump with legs, an Italian lieutenant notes in his diary. They run better than they fight. The Axis confirmation bias is now concrete. They have tested the Americans, and the Americans have failed. Rommel, emboldened by the collapse, believes he can drive all the way to the huge Allied supply depot at Tebessa. If he takes that, he splits the Allied armies in two. The Americans might be thrown out of Africa entirely. Back at the Allied headquarters, the mood is funereal. British commanders are openly contemptuous. General Anderson, commanding the British First Army, essentially suggests that American troops shouldn't be trusted with the line anymore. But amidst the wreckage of burning Shermans and the shame of retreat, something unseen is breaking. It isn't the American Army. It is the old way of thinking. The diagnosis: Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, looks at the reports piling up on his desk in Algiers. The casualty lists are staggering. Over 6,000 Americans killed, wounded, or missing. 183 tanks destroyed, he doesn't blame the soldiers. He blames the system. He sees Fredendall, the Corps commander, sitting in an underground bunker he had engineers blast out of rock for him, hundreds of miles from the fighting, obsessed with maps while his men die in the mud. He sees a lack of disciplined, unshaven troops, loose uniforms, officers who treat war like a 9-to-5 job. Eisenhower realizes that the Axis mockery is justified. The U.S. Army is soft. It is amateurish. But unlike the Axis commanders who believe this condition is permanent, Eisenhower knows it is temporary. He knows that the American soldier is a rough diamond covered in mud. He just needs a grinder to polish him. He needs a man who doesn't care about being liked. A man who hates the Germans more than he loves his own career. A man who will take this broken, humiliated mob and turn them into a weapon of war. Eisenhower picks up the phone. He orders Fredendall relieved of command immediately. The date is March 6, 1943. A staff car pulls up to the 2nd Corps headquarters. The dust settles and a single boot hits the ground. It is polished to a mirror shine. Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr. has arrived. And the vacation is over. March 7, 1943. Jebel Queif, the 2nd Corps headquarters. 8 o'clock hours. The change isn't subtle. It arrives with the scream of a klaxon horn. A command car tears into the dusty courtyard of the headquarters, flying an oversized flag with 3 stars. Out steps a man who looks less like a modern general and more like a Roman centurion lost in the 20th century. General George S. Patton Jr. does not walk. He struts. He is wearing cavalry breeches, high-polished boots, and 2 ivory-handled revolvers strapped to his waist. He looks ridiculous to some, terrifying to most. Within 1 hour, the entire culture of the 2nd Corps is upside down. Instead, the American infantrymen are hunkered down in foxholes they dug deep into the rocky soil. They are watching the metal monsters approach, their hands sweating on their bazookas, but they hold their fire. They hold the line. Patton has given a simple order. We are not going back. We are going to kill the sons of bitches right here. The German column reaches the predetermined kill zone. The trap is sprung. The radio crackles in the American Fire Direction Center. Coordinates are read. Stopwatches are checked. Fire. The sky falls in the Italian lines. The mockery dies instantly. The air above the valley suddenly compresses. It is the sound of a freight train falling from the sky. The time-on-target barrage hits the 10th Panzer Division with apocalyptic force. It is not a bombardment. It is a sledgehammer from God. Tanks are flipped over like toys. Infantrymen are vaporized. The ground churns into a moonscape of cratered ruin. The precision is terrifying. The Americans aren't missing anymore. As the smoke clears, the surviving Axis tank crews try to reverse, but they find themselves running into a wall of American tank destroyers M1 Wolverines positioned perfectly in hull-down positions. The amateurs have learned to use the terrain. General Patton stands on a hill overlooking the carnage, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He watches the vaunted 10th Panzer Division burn. He watches the Americans counterattack, moving with a grim, coordinated efficiency that was impossible just a month ago. A smile creeps across his face. He lowers the binoculars and looks at his aide. "Rommel," he whispers, his voice thick with adrenaline. "I read your book." The Italians are not laughing anymore. The Germans are not sneering. The realization hits them with the force of a 155mm shell. The giant has woken up, and he is very, very angry. May 6, 1943. Overlooking Tunis. 14 o'clock hours. The mockery has gone silent. There are no more jokes about the jewelers or the tourists. In the Axis trenches, there is only the gnawing hunger and the terrifying sound of the sky tearing apart. The Luftwaffe has vanished. The sky belongs to the Americans now. For the Italian and German defenders backed up against the sea, The war has become a mathematical impossibility. They are fighting an enemy who doesn't just attack, he accumulates. Where the Axis forces scrounge for every liter of fuel, siphoning gas from wrecked trucks to keep a single Tiger tank running, the Americans arrive with a horrifying abundance. From the heights, an Italian artillery officer watches the valley below. He doesn't see a column of soldiers. He sees a conveyor belt, truck after truck, mile after mile. They bring ammunition, spare parts, fresh uniforms, and most demoralizing of all, hot food. The weakness the Axis had laughed at, the American reliance on logistics, has revealed its true nature. It wasn't a weakness. It was a stranglehold. The Americans hadn't come to Africa just to fight. They had come to build a machine that would grind the Axis into dust, slowly, methodically, and without pause. Hill 609. The final exam, the proof of the American transformation, happens at Jebel Tayin Hill 609. It is a natural fortress, a flat-topped mountain controlling the road to Bizerti. The Germans have turned it into a killing zone. A few months ago, the Americans would have charged it blindly and died. But this is not the Army of Kasserine. The U.S. 34th Infantry Division, the Red Bulls, doesn't rush. They probe, they coordinate. They use the lessons Patton and his staff have drilled into them. They work in tandem with tank destroyers, using them as mobile artillery to snipe German machine gun nests from miles away. The infantry moves under a curtain of creeping artillery fire so precise it acts like a shielding wall. They take the hill, and they hold it. The German defenders are stunned. General von Arnim reports to Berlin that the Americans are no longer a mob. They are fighting with surprising tactical proficiency. It is a grudging admission that the student has surpassed the master. The Long Walk, May 13, 1943. The Coastal Road. The end does not come with a bang. It comes with a sea of gray and green. The final collapse of the Axis forces in Tunisia is absolute. With their backs to the Mediterranean and the Royal Navy blocking any escape, the order is given: surrender. What happens next is one of the most surreal scenes of World War II. They come out of the hills in the thousands, then the tens of thousands. It is a human flood. Nearly 250,000 Axis soldiers, more than were captured at Stalingrad, lay down their arms. The Desert Fox's army ceases to exist. Major Graziani, the man who once mocked the American prisoners for their clean uniforms, now walks in a dusty column of defeated men. He is exhausted, thirsty, and filthy. He looks up as a Willys Jeep drives slowly past the column. Inside sits an American sergeant, one arm resting casually on the wheel. The American looks healthy. He is smoking a cigar. He is holding a cold bottle of Coca-Cola. The American spots Graziani staring. He doesn't sneer. He doesn't spit. He simply reaches into the back of the Jeep, grabs a tin of rations, and tosses it to the Italian officer. Graziani catches it. It's a tin of peaches. In that moment, the humiliation is total. The Italians had thought the Americans were soft because they required luxuries to fight. Now, holding the tin, Graziani realizes the terrifying truth. The Americans didn't win because they were better warriors. They won because they could turn war into an industry. They could ship peaches to hell itself. The tourists had not only survived the desert, they had bought it. The legacy as the sun sets over the prisoner camps in Tunisia, the noise of the guns finally fades. The North African campaign is over. The soldiers who survived Kasserine Pass are no longer green. They are veterans now. They have learned the hard lessons of blood and sand. They have seen their friends die due to incompetence, and they have seen their enemies die due to precision. They are boarding ships again, but they aren't going home. They are looking north, across the Mediterranean, towards Sicily, towards Italy. The Axis commanders in Rome and Berlin are no longer laughing. They are frantically fortifying their beaches. They know now what is coming. They know that the giant isn't just awake. He is coming to knock down their front door.